No one was at risk.
So we've had a day that I would say reminds a lot of people of 1994. It reminds us a little bit of the Madiba era, the idea that everyone votes, everyone is equal in this particular act of political action. And so in a strange way, I would like to ask you this question, Professor Ntletiana. Can voting day be quite uniting? And can the receiving of the results divide us once again?
I think everyone by now accepts that democracy is the most preferred form of government, that we are committed to democratic principles. No one contests even the idea of voting, right? And that's a good thing, because it means we prefer to solve things through rules, participating in institutions instead of facing each other with knobkiris on the street, right? But of course, the results will divide us, because everyone wants to be in parliament, everyone wants to be president, right? But what then guarantees that the outcome will be accepted is the integrity of the rules. If the process is fair, if it is transparent and everyone agrees that the rules were observed, then there's no reason for results to divide us, unless there are certain instances that cannot be explained. Then you have a problem. But even there, you do have an electoral court. First, you have the IEC, which will look at these disputes, and everyone agrees that the IEC has carried itself fairly well so far. The party political structure that they have discusses these things, and they all come to some agreement. If they can't agree, then they can take that to the electoral court. So there is a clearly spelled out mechanism, even in instances where they don't agree on results. And ultimately, because they accept the legitimacy of the system, that you have credible people selected through a rigorous system that ensures that the entire system has integrity. And out of that institutional integrity come acceptable and legitimate results.
Angela, can I pick up on this with you? I remember Professor Stephen Friedman, a colleague of yours, I'm sure you'll know Professor Friedman, he's written once that in 1994, at the IEC as it was then, there was a question around how do you decide if the election is free and fair and legitimate, and in the end the answer they came to was if the losers accept the results. Which, I mean, philosophically I suppose makes sense. I don't know if there is a better way of doing it. It's very important in any system for the people who don't win to accept the results.
So let's not forget that in the 25 years that have passed, institutions of state have been created precisely to deal with this. So 1994, on the eve of and in the middle of what is essentially a civil war inside the country at a low-grade level, it was important for the losers to accept the result, for that to be free and fair. In 2019, I think there are other ways in which to check, which include the data mechanisms for checking, the monitoring systems, but also, should the losers not accept the result, we wouldn't have the consequences that we would have had in 1994, because those losers now have, among other things, a court system that they can go to inside the electoral system, and any kind of extra, shall we say, systemic approach would be considered to be anti-state and deeply insurgent, and would be dealt with in terms of the Constitution. So the constitutional order is, I think, central, and no one is going to storm the citadels of power because they're unhappy with the result. And if they do, the state would, again, shall we say, declare its monopoly of violence and rein those people in.
Okay, one of the things that's going to happen after this is there'll be the ceremonies in Parliament, the swearing in of the MPs. Chief Justice Mogoeng will preside over that. Then there'll be the election of a president, then a state, then an inauguration, and all the rest. There'll be a big conversation about the cost of that. In some ways, there already has been. Could I put a counter-argument to suggest that one of the things that's quite important after an election is actual ceremonies of state that serve as a moment of unity? That, in other words, for example, you have, and it can be small things. In the past, we've had concerts where, people from all communities have sung to, people outside the union buildings, for example. Are those kind of rituals that we often complain about the cost of, are they actually quite important to building that sense of nationhood or statehood after an election, which could be quite divisive?
So those are forms of statecraft that manufacture the consent into this idea that this is a unified nation. But we must also be careful that we don't just take them at face value, because we have a 25-year legacy of having such constructions of nationhood that then become, have consequences that people question because they often cover over. It's sort of the face of banal nationalism, to use the phrase of Michael Billig. We fly the flags, we sing the anthem, we feel good about ourselves, and we suture over the gaps that threaten the unity and leave those gaps unattended, and as a result there's actual real fracturing.
Okay. Professor Ntletyana, when we look at what happens from here, for the first thing to say is that a lot of people are going to drink a lot of coffee over the next couple of days, and once they get through that, a lot of people are going to have to sort of think again. Some of the electoral strategies that we've seen might have backfired, some of them might not have worked. We've seen elections where one leader of a party, is not a former leader yet, has had to eat his hat. We're likely to see a little bit of introspection from some of the parties, I would say.
And some of them won't be around by Sunday or Monday. But I think parties, there's going to be a lot of jostling, a lot of informal negotiations, especially if some of the results point to a possible coalition. And say, for instance, the ANC's majority comes down, which means that some folks are going to lose jobs, then you might have to figure out where do you place those people. Right? So because we tend to think that this is simply a democratic ritual. Yes, it is a ritual, but at the same time it's employment for a number of people. So some people are going to be quite anxious, and you are going to have serious negotiations happening.
All right, you're live tonight. We're here on SABC2 and on the SABC News channel, and we are, of course, bringing you the latest from the results. We are expecting some of the results. We're not sure when. We spoke to the Commissioner, Janet Love, Commissioner of the Electoral Commission, about an hour ago. She suggested that we might get some results sometime between 10, 11, 12 and possibly 1 o'clock. Joining us as we wait for the results, of course, we have Angelo Fick, the well-known analyst, and we have Professor Mcebisi Ntletyana, Professor of Politics at the University of Johannesburg. All right, let's go to Mzwandile Mbeje now.